Welcome, everyone. A warm welcome to our students and visitors alike. I can see some familiar faces in the room, and I've met one of the two of you already, and it would be nice to catch up afterwards as well. I'm just really going to say a couple of words to welcome you. If you've not been to the business school before, this is one of our main theatres in which we run these types of programs. This actually started out life, as for some of you may know this, as the best practice series of seminars and discussions and debates several years ago, and it's been running for a number of years. This year we decided to take it one step a little bit further, hence the term next practice, because everyone was telling us, well, you need to share best practice, so we started to do that. But actually the really challenging part is to think a little bit beyond that, particularly in this area around entrepreneurship, which Chris will guide you through in terms of our speakers this evening. So a warm welcome to Matt, to Kevin, Ivan and Beth. And Beth's actually working with us very closely all week, actually, in the new Imperial Enterprise Lab, which you can see named here. So Enterprise Lab is a new facility. It's on the other side of campus. It's a 250 square meter facility for students, every student at Imperial, to develop and encourage them in their entrepreneurial journey, whether that's to go out and do a startup, or whether it's to join a large company, whether that's in R&D or in some technical positions. And most of our students, as you will know, love to go into those sort of science technology-driven industries. So you're very welcome to come across to the lab as and when you find the time, either today if that's feasible, otherwise just drop us a line or come and see me and be happy to show you around. In the meantime, I'm going to hand over to Chris, who's just joined the lab team. And Chris is going to introduce the panel and guide us through the rest of the evening. Over to you.
Thank you, Bruno. Thank you. Just wanted to check the slides. Okay, perfect. Yes, so thank you very much for coming, everyone. And yeah, would like to kick off the event just very quickly, framing a little bit the debate that we've got today. It will hopefully set the scene for the four panelists that you're going to hear from. So just a quick show of hands. Who thinks you can teach management, good management? Who thinks you can teach that? Hands up if you think you can. Great, okay. I can tell all the business school students have got their hands up, which is encouraging, apart from one or two. Second question, who thinks you can teach entrepreneurship? Hands up if you think you can teach entrepreneurship. Okay, so fewer hands. And I think that often depends on how we define entrepreneurship. So Bruno mentioned the mission of the lab is to essentially nurture future entrepreneurs and innovators as well, so within large corporations. So we want to sort of dispel the myth, obviously, that every successful entrepreneur has to be a dropout. That's certainly not something we encourage at Imperial College. However, what we do want to encourage is framing entrepreneurship a little bit more like opportunistic thinking. So if you can teach someone how to think like an entrepreneur, they've got slightly more chance about actually going out there and doing it, and having the courage to go and follow through with a great idea or a great concept that they've come up with. And rather selfishly, we've framed this debate a little bit around a very provocative question, of course, around this polarity between entrepreneurs as opportunistic, sort of piecemeal tacticians who grow businesses in a sort of in a piecemeal fashion. So they try a few different opportunities, a few ideas, and wait until one gets the hook and becomes a major success. And then the others who arguably Zuckerberg and Elon Musk have become, which are these grand visionaries. They want to put spaceships on Mars. So the idea was actually to frame it more around the way we want to teach students entrepreneurship and the way we want to nurture an entrepreneurial mindset. And essentially get people to go from this side, the managerial thinking, which is very causal. So they start off with certain means, and they want to get to a predetermined goal in order to achieve that. So you've got multiple means to get to a given goal. They want to put a man on Mars, and they've got multiple means of getting there. But there's a much more, so this is a new sort of way of thinking called effectual reasoning, which is about thinking. I'll give a bit of a sort of background to that in a second, but giving, with your given means you have a degree in machine learning or computer science at the college. What can you do with that? How can you go away and create new things and innovate in large organizations as well? So these really came from two main sort of lines of thought in this idea of entrepreneurship, and how do you sort of nurture that kind of mindset. The lean startup movement, which very much goes for the first one. So this kind of strategic means to an end planning. It's very linear and it expects you to, if you follow certain steps, you'll get to this wonderful new venture. And it's something that we like to question a little bit at the college, especially when we have a lot of high-tech entrepreneurs that believe that just by following a process or a plan, it'll get you to your end goal, which is not always the case. And then there's this idea of effectuation, which really in principle starts with this idea of who am I, what do I know, who do I know? This concept of failing fast and often, and each step is getting you closer to a potential new business opportunity, a potential new startup. So that's the kind of way we framed it. We've already had some quite interesting partners who believe in our mission as well. So Founders Forum were here over the weekend. They start with the entrepreneur and encourage you to fail fast and often and put you in that mindset rather than just take your idea and give you that linear model to go and follow. And Brent Hoban was here talking about this approach just over the weekend, founder of lastminute.com. But that's how we really wanted to frame the debate a little bit selfishly, because we want to get perspectives from our students, perspectives from 3 entrepreneurs and a venture capitalist as well, to provide both ends of the story, to show a bit about their journey, their entrepreneurial journey, and their approach to building successful businesses. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Beth Marcus, our entrepreneur in residence. She's had several startups, 5 that have actually scaled up and had very successful transactions, one in particular to Microsoft, which I'm sure she'll tell you all about. So please give a round of applause to our first speaker.
Hello, is this thing on? Oh, good. All right. I forget what are in my slides, so I'll just talk, and people can interrupt me at any time. So I would call myself, whoa, I'm not going to do that. At the moment, I'm a recovering serial entrepreneur after starting and exiting 5 different companies, and I'll talk a little bit about those and what I've learned. And in my recovery, I signed on to be an EIR here this year, helping the E-Lab, and the R is in region because I don't live here. I live in the States, but this is my second of 3 trips planned to help the students here. And then in between, I'm Skyping and talking to them via email and doing what I can to help them and teach them and connect them. Marcus Enterprises Limited was created after I sold my first company to Microsoft in 1996. I named it this because the initials, which is what I use, is me and limited. Because after selling my first company, I didn't want to do that much. And so every time I leave a company, I think, well, I need to remind myself every day to not take on 400 things and not start another company right away. I haven't been very successful in stopping myself from starting companies before. So my company did the original force feedback controllers that came into the PC game market. So if you guys played Microsoft Flight or NASCAR, that was our technology. There were 30-odd patents on force feedback control for robots, virtual reality, and for games that came out of that. And there's been millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars of litigations on those after Microsoft bought them. And then my last company, Playrific, which was a kids app company, and I can tell you more about that later, was sold in December, hasn't been announced, to a company that's in the marketplace out of Brazil and is expanding to the US. And 3 companies in between. I've been an advisor and investor in companies, so I like to help other people. And I've lost track of the number of patents that I'm on or have issued, but it's somewhere north of 20. It might be north of 30. So this is just a short description of the different companies. So Exos was the original company that I started out of Arthur D. Little, which was a large consulting company, because I was interested in robotics, and I had a PhD in biomechanics, and there were these robot hands that had just appeared, and people would take 6 months to program them, and I built an exoskeleton so they could control them right away. And I'm listing here the pivots in the company, so you can see that we failed a lot along the way in most of these businesses, and that was good because we learned the market. So we went from grants to build medical products to selling $2 million evaluation and rehabilitation, hardware and software, to a joystick for the PC to sale to Microsoft. Then I ran HBN Shoe, makes a product called Insolia for women with high-heeled shoes. They make them not hurt your back and not hurt your feet, insolia.com. And Glow Dog at the same time. Glow Dog was my little cottage industry. I made dog jackets that were reflective so that when you're walking your dog at night, you didn't get run over. And then we made people clothing and we became a brand. So HBN started out making shoes. Now, I don't know if anybody's a student of the history of the shoe industry in the US, but there isn't one anymore. And right in the middle of our early development, all the factories were being closed with our technology in it. So ultimately it morphed into an insole product and a component licensing model. Glow Dog became a brand and was sold. And then I got involved back in the games and entertainment industry before there were smartphones and made a game controller for mobile phones. We sold a couple $1 million of them. And I got my butt kicked out the door by my investors and it tanked. So everybody has to have one of those to learn. And then Playrific started before there were smartphones and tablets, helping kids consume video and game content on the internet safely. And then it became an app company, and then when the app market tanked, it became a B2B company providing those services to other companies. So I guess my slides are, oh wait. So people are always saying, what is an entrepreneur? And there's really no job description. But I like acronyms because I did a lot of work for NASA early in my career. So I think poise is really important. People, opportunity, ideas, stick-to-itiveness or persistence and excitement. And those the entrepreneur's job really is to keep a balance between all of those elements for their team and for their investors. And they have to focus on building a successful business, not fall in love with their ideas, and be persistent. And you can ask questions about that. So what do you need to do? I think besides persistence, the most important skill is what you guys are doing here tonight, which is networking. And I say networking plus plus because it's more than just meeting people. Some of the students have asked when I've lectured here the last time, well, how do you network? What do you do to follow up? So that's the plus plus. You have to cultivate the skill. You have to practice your elevator pitch. You have to tell everybody you ever meet what you're doing and what you need so that they can help you. And it's another acronym, FRIENDS, or friend, I left off the S. So you have to use every resource you know and those you don't know about. Because if you meet 2 people here tonight who remember what you're doing, and they know 10 people, maybe in that group of 20, there's somebody who can help you. And if you don't tell them, and if you don't give them your business card and connect with them, you're not going to get that benefit. Because what you expect to happen seldom occurs. And it doesn't happen on the schedule that you expect. After I sold my first company, I started writing a book called The Instant Entrepreneur and Why There Was No Such Thing. And I interviewed 5 influential people who helped me along the way and asked them, why did you help me? And one of them said, I felt sorry for you. And you were so persistent that I finally introduced you. He introduced me to it was Bob Metcalf from 3Com. He introduced me to Pierluigi Zappacosta, the founder of Logitech, who ended up being my customer who taught me what the market was for my technology and told me to build the joystick, which led to the sale of my company. And it was all because I went to an event, I reached for the same cookie as Bob, and I gave him my card, and then I bugged him to death in a nice way. So you need to remember the journey is going to be longer and harder than you expect. So you better enjoy it. Don't tank your life in favor of your business, because when you're very old, I hope, and you're on your deathbed, you're not going to be thinking about what was your revenue last year. You're going to be thinking about the people around you who you love and who love you. And if you don't make room for them in your entrepreneurial journey, you're not going to have success, you're not going to be resilient, and you're not going to have a good life. And I'm a really strong believer in sharing with all of my people in my company, down to the person who, takes out the trash. Because if you run out of money, in my companies, people don't leave, they stay. And they do it because they feel like it's their company too. And that's how companies get built and are successful. And don't be afraid. So that's my summary.
Thank you, Beth. And just curious, what would you characterize yourself? I don't know if it's really necessary to think about in this way, but do you think this dichotomy exists between visionary and tactician?
No, but I think it's down to balance and poise. Because 75 to 90% of an entrepreneur's job on a daily basis as they get their venture going is crap work. It's stuff that doesn't take that creative spark. It's the paperwork for your closing your financing. It's the reviews for your employees. It's the networking to find a new customer. It's not visionary creation for most people, unless they have a company that's an invention company. And so they have to realize that that's the tension and the balance. A lot of smart people, they want to invent every day. If they invent every day, they'll swamp their company and they'll never get anything accomplished. So I think about poise and balance when you think about those two things.
And finally, to pass on to Kevin Chong from Beacon Capital, who can hopefully provide a sort of slightly different perspective from the venture capital angle, having come across many, many entrepreneurs in your time. And you've got your clicker.
Just stand over here. Got it. Okay, so when Chris gave me the topic for the evening, it reminded me of this multi-choice test-taking tip, which is that in any question with all of the above as a choice, if you see at least two correct statements, then chances are all of the above is the correct answer. And for me, the question grand visionary or piecemeal tactician is a false choice, because from what I've seen, and I've seen thousands of startups, invested in quite a few, you have to be a bit of both. You definitely have to be a bit of both. And the idea of a grand vision is something that is a much touted quality for tech entrepreneurship. And it's something that people talk about all the time. And at the early stage, that idea of having a vision does have many roles to play. It gives you it's the guide. It's a guide for setting tactics. It's a guide for setting priorities. But actually, most importantly, it's actually the glue. From what I've seen, it's the glue that binds together a team. And at the early stage, particularly when you've got half a dozen people, you're jammed together in a small dark room. You're trying to build a beta product, and at the same time, you're trying to sign up customers for that beta product that you haven't fully built yet. It's really, really useful to have a vision that that the group can share and defend. So it clearly has a role. But as all these guys have talked about this evening, the entrepreneur's journey is never linear, right? And hence the picture on the left. I think unexpected issues do crop up, and they crop up all the time, sometimes on a daily basis, sometimes on an hourly basis. And I think the entrepreneurs that do well are the ones who can duck and dive, who can wheel and deal, and I don't mean sort of doing shady deals. I'm talking about, when you've got to have that rare ability to sell a product that's not yet fully baked, right? You've got to be able to make some sacrifices to buy yourself some time. Sometimes you have to make some really big calls to restructure the team, and you have to do it very quickly. So you do have to have a bit of that. But I think that, and it's uncomfortable. Doing those things is often really uncomfortable, and sometimes it's brutally uncomfortable. And this is the other thing about having a big vision, is that sometimes, unfortunately, and I've seen it happen a lot. It can sort of blind. It can be blinding, in the sense that you're sort of stuck on that vision, and you don't recognize that actually you might not naturally have that aptitude to do all the sorts of things that come with that early, that I just talked about. So I thought I'd just very quickly pass on a few observations on some of the dangers that come with having a big vision. So I think most entrepreneurs, right, will frame their pitch based on a pain point, and the bigger the pain, the better. For example, you might say businesses all over the world rely on one piece of technology, and it's a piece of technology that's 40 years old. It's called email, right? And yet email is slow, it's unproductive, it doesn't help collaboration, it's light years away from mobile, mobile chat interface, and imagine instead we had a product that does away with all of that. It will organize all your existing emails. It will intelligently sift through it all, and it will tell you what's important. It will sync with your calendar. It will give you. It will generate a to-do list. And such a top-down vision is compelling. The market is huge. The pain's very clear. And in 2015, I saw a ton of startups working on exactly that, disrupting email. And coincidentally, 2015 was also the year when sort of VC activity really peaked, where we had record valuations, we had record dry powder in private equity funds. And whilst we were excited by this top-down vision, none of these email startups were able to answer some very basic bottom-up questions, which are, for instance, who are the buyers? The typical response was, we'd go after people with X number of employees or X number of email accounts, and we'll assume a reasonable conversion rate, and this thing will become an X million business. An entirely logical approach. But what about the other end of the telescope? The buyer has to be, very logically, simultaneously, has to be a real person, has to be somebody who's motivated to buy the product, and it's somebody that has a budget to spend. And unless you can identify such a real person, it just isn't a viable business. And when it comes to this email product that that sits on top of email, it wasn't obvious who that buyer would be. I mean, is it a CTO? Is it something? But will the CTO care enough about a product that whose sort of ROI was very difficult to ascertain? And how do you get people to break with a sort of decades-old habit? And the second sort of very basic question is, if you have identified a buyer, how do you get to that buyer? And again, the response was often quite generic. It would be, we'd have some optimized permutation of content, social, referral, partnerships, that sort of thing. And sort of very, most of these guys had sort of very good, solid understanding of all the sort of latest marketing techniques. But it couldn't answer the sort of very basic question, and to my mind, that, the answer to that question is, you have to have a list of people to go and sell to, and you have to have the right people to go and do the selling. And again, it just wasn't obvious with that type of thing. So the second observation about the hazards of a big vision is market validation. And I think it's very, very easy to be drawn in by a big vision, and you start executing straight away. And I've seen a lot of founders do exactly that, and they burn a lot of time, they burn a lot of emotional capital, and without enough validation. Because I think with the technology that we have today and the platforms that are available, you can actually get to a lot of people very quickly, hundreds, thousands, and you can actually get opinions in minutes, very quickly on your proposition. Obviously, you have to firstly, I think you have to be able to articulate your vision and then ask the question. But I think there's just no excuse for people who come and say, well, I went to a cafe and I bounced it off a few random people, or I checked it out with my relatives, that sort of thing. And just quickly, the last observation is around the runway. That's a sort of 5-kilometer runway. That's one of the longest runways in the world. It's where the space shuttle lands. And most of the time, when you're a startup, you have a much shorter runway than that. And it does take a long time to execute. I think at the early stage, obviously, as a startup, you live and die by your ability to raise the next round of funding. And I think to some extent, you have to make sure that the grand vision initially takes a back seat, because you have to have them in from milestones, because that's going to deliver that next round of funding. And I think to be a CEO at that early stage, you are the chief cash extraction officer. You have to constantly be in touch with your existing shareholders. You have to constantly be talking to the next providers of your funding, understand what they're looking for, so that you can secure that next round of funding. There is one caveat here, and I think some of these guys touched on it just now, that is that I think not all startups are suited to VC funding. Sometimes it can make perfect sense for a founder to break even and build a business without VC funding, and that doesn't mean that the vision's any less good. It's just another way of getting to a fully viable business. And then finally, there's something that people often don't take enough into consideration, which is what's your personal runway? Because I think you have to ask yourself, how many months of poverty, salary, and no holidays can you tolerate? And then you should probably double that and ask yourself whether that's something you can live with. So I think those sort of my observations around what are some of the pitfalls of having a big vision. But to sum up, I think it's back to the original question. Do you have to be a grand visionary or a piecemeal tactician? I think clearly a bit of both.
Thank you, Kevin. Okay, so if I could now invite our panel to take seats at the front. We're going to have a Q&A, so we've got about 25 minutes for a Q&A where you guys get to ask the questions. So I hope you've been sort of thinking a little bit about what you'd like to ask the panel. And also, in the meantime, I'd like to just set up, we have this neat tool called Mentimeter, which is an audience voting tool. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on the question. If you log into menti.com, as you can feel free to take your time on this. You don't have to come to the conclusion immediately, maybe at the end of the panel discussion, but please think about it, log in, cast your vote, and then we'll look at the results at the end. So that's all accessible via smartphones. So if I could open up to the floor, we've got our first question here. I'll pass this over so you can all hear it.
Thank you very much for this interesting vision. I have a question related about how to teach entrepreneurship. So I would like to ask, what is your idea about what is the best way of doing it? If we can teach them about how to face uncertainty. So how because actually they don't know if their idea is going to be scalable or not. So if it's more related about how they need to face that, or if we can use some methodology to do it, if there exists some methodology to teach them about making, for example, the design of the product in a gradual way rather than just iterative, like, for example, we have examples about lean startup that is iteration. So what is your thoughts about that? Thank you.
So my attitude towards this is the thing that engages young entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs the best, in my experience, is war stories. Tell them those things that happened that were cool, that were funny, that were disastrous, and then answer questions about how that might relate to what they're doing to teach the moral of every story. You know, I don't think that you can do an organized methodology because not everybody who comes to the table is the same. I've been mentoring students all week, and some of them are afraid of financials. Some of them are afraid of networking. Some of them are not sure their idea is good enough. Some of them have the imposter syndrome. And so you just have to, you know, show by example, let them see a lot of things, let them interact with a lot of different people who all have lessons to teach them. I know that's not that easy, but it's, I think, a good thing to do.
But I think the question before that, which I thought was interesting, in why would you get into a space when there are already a whole bunch of incumbents? I think in some circumstances that's actually a good thing, because it actually allows you to see that there is demand for this product, for this proposition, and it gives you an opportunity to sort of have a look at what the other guys are doing and say, can I do it better? I mean, take money remittance, for example, right? We all heard about TransferWise. We've invested in a competitor called Asimo. I think if you look it up, there are about 50, at least 50, and that was about a year ago when I looked at it, there's about 50 online money remittance platforms. And you ask yourself, why would somebody get into that space? Partly because when you look at it from a top-down approach, it's $1 trillion market, so that's a big starting point. But actually, even within that, there are sort of different niches. You have to look at sort of, what's wrong with the incumbents, what's wrong with Western Union, why, what and how you can do it, and how can it be done better. So I think just because there are existing players doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
Great. Yeah.
So, thanks. It'll be a quick one. Hi. Well, I think you all mentioned networking, and I come from an engineering and now a medical research background, and most of my colleagues and friends are not exactly the extroverted type. In fact, they may be very passionate about their ideas and about building relationships within the science field, but I think we tend to leave you guys here at the business school doing the networking and the coffees and the handshaking. And my question really to either of you or all of you is, what would be your number one advice for the more introverted type, still quite passionate about taking an idea to consumers who aren't quite comfortable and are very much out of their natural habitat? at networking
So-
events?
I have two choices for you. One choice is practice. I've been advocating with Bruno that we teach networking and we make people practice with each other so they get more comfortable. It's like before you ever made a presentation to a class, you were probably incredibly nervous, but after you've done it 1,000 times, you just do it. So that's the one side. And the other side, and I coached one of the teams, there were two really bright guys, but they were quiet, and it didn't seem like their brain was going to function in that way. And I said, go find yourself somebody you trust who's really good at that piece, and make sure that you understand their strengths and they understand your strengths, and get it together. You don't have to, I mean, you're an entrepreneur. Every minute that you spend in your business is like an investment from a venture capitalist. It's your personal capital. Why would you spend that on somebody who's not good at something, who has to learn it? If you could find somebody who's better than you to hire and bring in, do it.